afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Lori Call, Assistant Vice Chancellor of Local Government and Community Engagement here at the University of Colorado Boulder. We're so glad to have you joining us on this beautiful day and to talk about how the human rights crisis and the climate crisis have converged. And today we're taking a look at how things are impacting us on a local level. And so as part of this global summit, we also want to take a look at how things are being impacted regionally, and we have a group of experts here to help us discuss this. Before we get started, I want to recognize that the chair of our Board of Regents, Leslie Smith, is with us today, so thank you, Leslie. Thanks for your leadership. And I also want to recognize that Chase Cromwell from CUSG, our student leadership, is here. So thanks, Chase, for your leadership. In addition to our CU leadership, we do have leaders from the community here as well. And it's my most sincere honor to be welcoming our mayor of Boulder, Aaron Brockett, this afternoon. Aaron provides fantastic leadership for the city of Boulder. He's been a longtime advocate. He's a climate champion and also just a really, really wonderful person. So please join me in welcoming Aaron Brockett.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Lori. I will say that the relationship between the city and the university is a cornerstone of our community, and I'm happy to report that it has never been better. So really appreciate our partners here at CU very, very much. So good afternoon, everyone, and if you're from out of town, welcome to our fair city here of Boulder. I hope you're enjoying yourself, and make sure and get over to the windows and have a peek at our signature flat irons. There's no view more beautiful in the country or anywhere to be found, in my maybe slightly biased opinion. So I'd like to kick us off here today with a land acknowledgement, and this is one that we have co-created in collaboration between the city and the indigenous peoples that have lived here over the years. The city of Boulder acknowledges that the city is on the ancestral homelands and unceded territory of indigenous peoples who have traversed, lived in, and stewarded lands in the Boulder Valley. Those indigenous nations include the Apache, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Comanche, Kiowa, Pawnee, Shoshone, Sioux, and Ute. We honor and respect the people of these nations and their ancestors. We also recognize that indigenous knowledge, oral histories, and languages handed down through generations have shaped profound cultural and spiritual connections with Boulder area lands and ecosystems, connections that are sustained and celebrated to this day. And then before I turn it over to the panelists, I just want to say this is such an important topic to us. The city has focused on fighting climate change and climate leadership for decades, and we're very proud to be part of a community that has environmental protection and sustainability in our core. And you know, for many years we have had a failure of leadership at the federal level. Fortunately, we've gotten some help recently with the Inflation Reduction Act, and we've got some really great things coming. But for so long, it's fell to local communities to do the best that they can to fight climate change in the absence of help from higher levels. And so we've had extraordinary leadership here at the local level on our staff, and could not have done, to the extent, let me just say, to the extent that we are a climate leader, which I think we are, it's due in large part to the leadership of Jonathan Cohn here on my right, who is our Director of Climate Initiatives, and will be moderating the panel today. So I learn from him every time I hear him talk, so I'm looking forward to hearing what he and this illustrious panel have to tell us today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor Brockett. I actually want to return the compliment. It's always great to share the stage with you, obviously, and I think you heard Lori say it when she called you a climate champion. I think there is a theme that we're going to hear a lot of over the next couple of days, and that is the importance of political courage. And I just have to remark that we have been so fortunate in Boulder to have the leadership and the courage of Mayor Brockett, the rest of the council members, very historically. And you know, I just have to say, I think over and over again, this council, our council, makes climate action at the local level a top priority. And so, Mayor, I just really want to respond by saying thank you for all of your leadership as well. So, of course, I need to say thanks to our colleagues at CU for putting on this amazing event, and thanks to all of you, my goodness, for being here. I gotta say, I'm a little starstruck. I look out in this audience and I see a lot of climate champions out there, our colleagues with Boulder County, I think some are here, some former elected officials are here. So again, we could not be doing this if it wasn't for all of our partnerships across this jurisdiction and across wider. We're gonna talk about that, the importance of collaboration as we go on. So again, my name is Jonathan Cohen, and I am honored to serve the Boulder community as a director of the Climate Initiatives Department. You all recognize what an amazing panel this is. However, I'm just gonna come clean and tell you it's a little bit different than you might expect. Two of our panelists, Jennifer Balch and Hannah Brinkert-Smith, both came down with the crud. That's a technical term. I think just this morning, and so we are so fortunate to have Heidi Van Genderen pinch hitting for us, which we should have started with, frankly, because she's remarkable. So we wanted to do something a little bit different with this panel, so if you indulge me for just a minute to level set a little bit. I think we could have spent a good amount of time today talking about the programming that we historically do, things like energy efficiency, access to renewables, what we're doing to harden our infrastructure to make ourselves more resilient. However, I think really we wanted to start exploring collectively what we define as climate action. What is the role of local jurisdictions? How can we be most effective at the local level? And most importantly, how do we tie this to the theme of this conference, which is human rights? So there is, I think, a lot of direction we could go with this panel, but I will just kind of kick things off and get right to it. The signs of the climate crisis are all around us, and the impacts are undeniable. I think every year we see more scientific evidence telling us what we in this room and others are already experiencing, and that is that climate disruption is not looming in some imaginary future. It is here and it is now. So that is a justifiably frightening thing. I think there's also a fairly typical source of frustration to many of us in this room, and that's that somehow the climate emergency is seen as separate from an ecological emergency or a social emergency, even though they overlap both in terms of their causes and their solutions. So I'm gonna go a little deep here, so just hang with me. It's, I think, abundantly clear that we live in an inequitable society, which means that the burdens created by climate change are not felt equally. This is something that we are all starting to come to grips with. More than 400 years of racial oppression and systemic racism have negatively impacted people of color's access to healthcare, education, transportation, socioeconomic opportunities, just to name a few. And this is the same for the effects of climate change. So let's look at heat for just a moment. According to a report actually by Paul Shanowski, who's on our panel, in 2017, Paul did an amazing report looking at the trends toward increasing temperatures here in Boulder County, which will lead to adverse health impacts and outcomes. So some of those are directly related to heat, things like more instances of heat stroke, while others I think are a little bit more indirectly related to a warming climate, things like higher asthma rates or allergy rates. So without a focus on correcting those injustices, work on our climate change really addresses only the symptoms and not really the root causes. So as we plan as a community for a future in which our weather is more unpredictable, threats of flooding and wildfire increase, hotter summer days occurring more frequently, equity has to be at the core of all of our efforts to reduce our climate impact and work to adapt to a changing climate. I promise I'm getting close to being done. So at the center of our work here in Boulder, we acknowledge that while we strive for this idea of equity, inclusion, and social resilience, we do have a long way to go to address racism and bias. I want to humbly thank and applaud those in our community who continue to advocate for and champion a focus on human rights. It may seem paradoxical discussing global climate impact changes and how it's having an impact on human health in such an affluent community like Boulder. But I guarantee everyone in this room has been impacted by climate change in one way or another. And it's very normal to step out into wildfire smoke or another day of extreme heat and feel that this is hopeless and feel despair. But that's not what this event is about. This event is about finding inspiration and finding hope, finding solutions, and more importantly, implementing those solutions. So let's get to our panelists. I've talked enough. I want to start actually by just acknowledging who's sitting up here, Heidi Van Genderen. We're going to introduce everybody, don't worry. And if you want a longer bio, I'll introduce you to a thing called Google. Heidi Van Genderen, Brett Kincairn, Crystal Lauder, and Paul Shanowski. So I'm going to wander back down here to the other end so we can get started with Paul. So Paul, just a quick introduction of Paul. You're going to sit here uncomfortably while I introduce you. So Paul is a professor emeritus here at the university in civil engineering and the director of Resilient Analytics, where he focuses on the impact of climate change to infrastructure and thinking about our adaptive measures, both in terms of programs and also policy. So I'm going to tee up a question for you, and then I'm going to let you go. So your work with Resilient Analytics, I already talked to everybody a little bit about that, is pretty far-reaching. I think your specific efforts with the city and the county is really interesting as we worked on the creation of an actual tool that maps risks and vulnerabilities. And it's unique in that it's an example of what I like to think of as observational science. And that means that local communities can really use that tool in addressing and developing policies and programs and interventions. So it doesn't just look at conditions today, but it looks at how our community might anticipate things like increased temperatures, risk of wildfire floods, et cetera. So my question to you is if you could talk a bit about your work, how that tool can be used in addressing community-based risks, and more importantly, how do we tie that to vulnerable populations?
Okay. We'll do that all quickly,
Yeah,
too.
you can do that.
All right. So I've had the fortunate experience of working all over the world on this topic. And one of the things that I have found over the last 20 years is the topic we're talking about right here, acting locally, is no different than we talk about whether it's in Kenya or Vietnam, wherever it is around the world. And I call it the so what of climate change. We get very enamored with the science of climate change, the numbers. Right? We hear about the conferences, 2 degrees warming, 1.5 degrees warming. And it's important, it's critical, but it doesn't connect with the individual. And the challenge that we've had working with all of our constituencies, and we brought to this community, is how do we bring climate change to the neighborhood, to the individual household? How do we make action work at a local level? And it seems easy, right? But we all know what to do, but yet we don't. We don't know how individual actions, it's frustrating at times. We know it's getting hotter. We know that wildfires are increasing. But this is what I call awareness. We are caught up in awareness. Let's map more and more the little differences from community to community. Great. So what? Ultimately, climate change is about the people and the people being affected. And what we need to do, and why we built these tools to help Boulder, and why we're doing this around the world, is how do we move to action? Not just as a city, but in collaboration with individuals, with the neighborhoods. And the way we are approaching this, and we've worked with the UN, the World Bank, with countries and with cities, is let's bring really practical actions down to the individual level that take into account adaptive capacity. We have this very strange approach that's happening around the world that everyone can adapt equally. That's not true. Not everyone's going to go out and buy an electric vehicle, right? Not everyone can ride the bus or ride their bike all the time. Some people have jobs that they have to take tools and they have to drive a car. Some people don't live with incomes that they can put solar panels on their houses without help. And it's our job to really both identify these populations and figure out what's appropriate in terms of action. And that's what this is all about. appropriate action to the appropriate level to the individuals that can take appropriate actions. And that's what the tool is all about, and that's really the message that I bring. We've got to move past just being aware of climate change. You're never going to convince everybody that climate change exists. There are always going to be people who just want to argue about it. But in the end, climate change is not acting differently in a red neighborhood or a blue neighborhood in the US versus Germany. It's climate change. Heat affects all of us. Now we have to move to action. And that's really what everything has been about, is we need to create tools that create awareness, identify the populations, and then identify the actions we can take. That's step one.
Oh my goodness. Oh boy. We could spend the next couple of hours together and only scratch the surface. Paul, I want to come back to you because I think your comments just really raised a lot of questions for me that I want to loop back to. But I really appreciate this connection to humans and ecosystems in general. And so this is a great connection then, I think, to what Crystal is going to talk about. Before I introduce you, it's really been fantastic, I think, over the past couple of years for the city to really understand and explore the champions we have within our own organization. Normally we think, well, planning, that's a separate thing than climate, which is a separate thing from transportation, and we're really coming together in a very holistic way. So I'm so grateful for our partnership with Crystal and the work she does. So Crystal has been working on housing policy, planning, and projects for over a decade with the city. She consults regularly with cities across the country and is regarded, in my opinion, I wrote this, as an expert on mobile home preservation. She is a true champion in raising up the collective voice of manufactured homeowners, and she's contributed to state enforcement on Mobile Home Park Act, which gives residents opportunities to purchase in their communities and establish state funding to support preservation. So Crystal, here's my tee up for you. So Paul's talking about the need to better understand the specific climate-related vulnerabilities in our communities. And I think like most cities, Boulder is faced with this joint challenge of our climate crisis and lack of housing that's affordable and healthy. And it seems the way we're producing and rehabilitating housing in this country is not really meeting the demand, and it's maybe somewhat at odds with our collective need to address emissions and create more resilient communities. So I'm wondering if you could talk a bit or share some comment on the connection between climate and housing, and maybe highlight some of the work that you've been doing.
Sure, yeah. So I apologize. There's so much to do, I think, to connect the topic of climate to affordable housing. So I have some notes because of my discursive thinking here. However, yeah, so kind of on the high level, the connection is really like there's extremes that are happening now, right? There's extreme temperatures and there's extreme weather events. And if you're on the low, when I talk about housing, I'm primarily I'm worried about affordability. Affordability means that you're only spending about 30% of your income on your housing. That's kind of what the test of affordability is from if you're in affordable housing parlance. But if you have a lower income, you're still on those high temperature days or cold temperature days, you're going to need maybe run into issues with safety. You're going to experience more challenges around comfort in your house, right? And your energy costs are going to go up. So that's the temperature side of things. And then on the extreme weather side, there's just structural vulnerability. So in some cases, housing built in the past can have poor construction quality, deferred maintenance because you can't afford the maintenance cost, Older infrastructure is another issue that we've encountered. And then the location, a lot of times a more affordable place to live may be located in a more kind of hazard-prone area. And then the other kind of thing that's happening right now is the development pressure in these kind of upmarket economies like Boulder. There's more development pressure, so there's a pressure to also just eliminate these communities, right? And I think kind of on the grand scheme, the way that we're really kind of poised as a country to deal with affordable housing and support affordability, we hope, our bread and butter program is the low-income housing tax credit program. And so there's a lot of good that's happening right now to kind of move the affordable housing stock in the direction of just greater resilience and efficiency, more electric vehicle parking and so forth, because they have, like at our local Colorado Housing and Finance Authority has a qualified allocation plan, and it makes it so that your project is more likely to get funded if it meets certain criteria, right? So kind of overall, we're set up that way. And kind of as Jonathan was alluding to, my realm of where I've just been kind of putting a lot of my time over the last decade has turned into manufactured housing. So mobile home parks is a term we, I think, hear a lot. And then manufactured home communities is another way. So I might kind of bounce between those two terms. But part of the reason that I work on this issue is because we actually have a comprehensive plan policy around manufactured housing, and we recognize that manufactured housing is an important option for households in this area. Let me see here, temporary solutions. Yeah, so I think some of there are unique vulnerabilities in our manufactured housing. We have 1,300 households, or about 4% of our housing stock is manufactured homeowners. It was a post-World War II solution to a lack of housing. There, as I mentioned earlier, can be locational challenges. One of the other vulnerabilities that is kind of inherent to manufactured housing is that it's split tenure. So somebody owns the land, somebody else owns the home, and then you have these kind of polar opposite interests, right? There's one party that kind of is interested in how to maximize profit, and another one who wants affordability, right? And then I think the other key piece that's kind of built into our policy is that affordable home ownership. This is our market rate affordable housing in pretty much any community around the Denver metro area and most of the United States, right? That's the market rate affordable homeownership option, and it allows for wealth building. And wealth building is a form of resilience that'll help a household bounce back more quickly, right? So other things to know about people living in these communities, and again, just kind of tying into this idea of what's unique, who these people are. Actually, in a partnership with the Boulder Affordable Housing Research Initiative, there was a study that was commissioned, and in 2019, and so they actually surveyed our manufactured home communities, and there was just a higher rate of people who own their homes there, which is kind of seems obvious, but that's actually important, right? There's more families with children, more Latino households. Let me see here. Yeah, and then households earning under $40,000, much higher rate, like 3 times as high, and more people over the age of 60. Some of the projects I've worked on related to this, in 2013, we had the 2013 flood. One of the communities that I began working with then was Ponderosa Mobile Home Park. It's adjacent to West 4 Mile Canyon Creek, so it's in a floodplain. But it was actually just the water infiltration into the ground from the sky that really created the problem, because there was so much saturation of the soils for so many months. It actually caused the sewer and water infrastructure to start to break, and they just started having lots and lots of breaks, and they came to the city interested in replacing their infrastructure, right? And so from there, we were able to get a resilience planning grant. That's kind of an opportunity that comes up when there's a federal disaster. That's the type of opportunity that comes up. And we use that to do community engagement and to kind of look at what that cost would be. And that led to us hearing from the community. 11 goals and drivers were set. One of the big ones was minimizing displacement. And I feel like this idea of how can we work in a very low-income community? We've got 2/3 of people living in this community with incomes that are considered extremely low. They're below 30% of the area median income. So how can we avoid displacement? So I think that, when you talk about partnership, this has, I think, allowed all of our departments to kind of work collaboratively to look at the ways that, transportation touches this. How can we create affordability through the energy, the approach to energy? How can we build better buildings that are tighter to reduce the energy burden? How can we use affordable housing programs? How do we let these homeowners continue to be homeowners by having special programs for that, right? So we've reduced the flood risk in there, replaced the infrastructure, and that we're in the process of launching our program. I could go on more. And yeah, we've just been really focused on minimizing displacement. And there's just other programs that have come out as well. We've done a manufactured housing strategy. I do think that doing a lot of the building of the collective voice, and which that kind of kicked off in about 2015, where there were some landlord-tenant issues. And so the city started investing annually in working in communities to build up homeowners associations and build that collective voice. And now there's kind of more of a bridging partnership with the Community Connectors program. So it's much easier at this point to, when Paul raised the question of like, how do you reach people? That's how you reach people, right? They actually become the leaders they're the leaders in their own community. It helps them. They, better navigate the COVID-19 pandemic and better navigate. We just had the wind disaster on December 30th of last year, right? That 450 households reported wind damage in these communities, and we were able to reach them through those networks. So anyway, that's just a taste.
Yeah.
But
that was more than a taste.
yeah. Oh, there's more.
I had a feeling. No, and I think you can see why it was important to have someone like Crystal on this panel to bring forward this really interesting dynamic and piece that we don't normally talk about in terms of local climate action. Two things that I just picked up on your comments before you pass the microphone to your left to Brett that I think creates a really nice segue. I'm really glad you brought up this issue of displacement. I think there are a number of really smart people at this university talking about green gentrification. What does that actually mean? When something like access to healthy green spaces is a human right. So how do we address that issue? And it gets to this point that I think Brett's going to talk about in terms of our natural climate solutions. So that was one really important issue. And then this collective space, which you just mentioned, the importance of really looking at how we build from individual actions to collective actions, which may happen at the neighborhood scale. How do we support that? And then how do we drive that towards the big systems that need to be changed on these crises like global climate change? So I want to connect the dots here to Brett a little bit, because Brett, I think many of you probably know Brett. He has been leading much of our work within our department and within the city around natural climate solutions. And Brett, I think I'm gonna bypass the long introduction, if you don't mind, because I want to get to your comments really quickly. One of the things that I think we recognize, and you've really helped us as a community understand, is that traditionally we focus on minimizing emissions from fossil fuel use, extraction and use, et cetera, and you've really helped us understand the importance of natural climate solutions within that space. And this is a new area for the city to be working in, and it's not superficial. It is really fundamental to the work we are doing locally for so many reasons, both in terms of mitigating and stabilizing climate and building resilience towards its impacts. So Brett, I want you to talk a little bit about why expanding the natural climate solutions is really a key strategy, and how does it support this prioritization and connecting with vulnerable populations?
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's really exciting to be here with our colleagues. I just wish we did have an hour for each of our colleagues here to talk more about the work they're doing, because it's truly remarkable. We're in a university setting. I just thought we should start with a pop quiz. And I thought, just in solidarity with my student colleagues, that we would just make this only for faculty. No. But I do have two questions for you to be pondering. The first is, what is the largest source of CO2 into the atmosphere? That's question one. And question two is, when was the convention around climate, which gave us the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, when was that founded? And what were the other two conventions that were created at the same time? Okay, so I'm going to now give you a few hints as we go into this. So, greatest source of CO2. Well, let's start with the conventional graphs that we're all very familiar with. I'm going to try to do a backwards whiteboard for you here. So the graph of atmospheric CO2, which of course Mauna Loa has been in the news recently. It's famous for its erupting volcanoes. It's also famous for the Keeling Observatory on atmospheric CO2. And so we have that, and by the way, we actually have a NIWAD observatory that's been gathering the same CO2 data, and we know that that CO2 level has been going up, right? And so mostly you'll see that curve as this smooth but very rapidly growing curve that's going up, and especially since around 1870. And that's then sort of the smoking gun of this is that we see the use of fossil fuels and its uptake is almost exactly matching the atmospheric CO2, therefore you have the causation, bingo, where we go. Well, let's just step back and say, well, how much CO2 is human activity generating into the atmosphere? Well, at current, it's in the neighborhood of 40 gigatons. Now, I know these numbers are just sort of relative things, but just to give you a sense, it's about 40 gigatons of CO2, which is a lot, that we have been pumping into the atmosphere. But when you look at, if you don't look at that curve carefully, you're going to miss a couple of things. The first is, it's not just that we've been burning fossil fuels. As it turns out, in fact, a group of researchers in 2017, Sanderman et al., released a report that said about 133 gigatons of the carbon, or about 450 gigatons of CO2, has been released not from burning fossil fuels, but from degrading land systems. The loss of soil, the loss of forests, the loss of perennial grasslands, the loss of wetlands, that has released almost a third of the excess CO2 that's in the atmosphere. So that's one. It's the degradation, it's literally the decarbonization of living systems that has also been driving this climate change, which, by the way, is, of course, directly linked to our displacement of indigenous and traditional land systems. So that you could say that, in fact, the first steps towards climate destabilization were not burning fossil fuels. They were the violent removal of indigenous land managers who were maintaining these robust, diverse ecosystems. Okay, so that's the first piece. The second piece is, if you have looked at that actual curve that's generated by the observations from the Mauna Loa Observatory, is it a smooth line? No, it's not. It's this crazy zigzag. Have you ever seen that? It's a zigzag. Well, why is it a zigzag? Because the natural world actually has a respiratory cycle that releases on the order of 800 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere annually. It just happens to turn out that it also absorbs a little bit more than 800 tons of gigatons of CO2 annually. So that living system dwarfs what we do as human beings, which is not to say that what we're doing isn't important, but it is to say that if we want to know what's truly influencing the atmosphere, what in fact actually maintains the dynamic of atmosphere that works for all of us as living beings, it is biological systems. Our atmosphere is not a geophysical machine dictated by CO2 in and out. It is actually a biologically mediated dynamic. And this is extremely important because we're now beginning to realize, and all the science is saying, that we will not stabilize climate by changing energy systems alone. In fact, to give you a sense of the scale of this, and actually the opportunity, it's important to realize that we live on a planet that is currently operating at about 50% of the photosynthetic capability it had about 1,000 years ago because of our presence and our activities. But the good news is, imagine how many more allies we can bring into this work of stabilizing climate if we restore that 50% of our planet that has been deeply degraded. So that's the story of where CO2 is really coming from and the dynamic of that balance. Which is why, second question, in 1992, at the Rio Earth Summit, there was a recognition that we faced not just one crisis around climate, we face multiple crises around biodiversity and around advancing desertification, which notice both of those are about living systems. And so that when the Convention on Climate Change was created, we created two other conventions around biodiversity and around combating desertification. We've heard much less about those, but we're going to start hearing more and more as we begin to realize that unless we implement natural climate solutions at scale, we will not accomplish our much-needed goal of stabilizing climate. And in fact, what's true is that what we need to do to stabilize climate is actually what we also need to do to stop the biodiversity crisis and stop the advance of desertification. So that maybe sounds even more daunting than the task if it was just about changing energy systems. But this is where it actually gets kind of exciting. So let's talk a little bit about what, first of all, let me just say, not only can we do it, we have demonstrated as a species that we can do it. We have done it before. And I would just offer you two of a number of interesting examples. If you haven't seen John Liu's work about the Loess Plateau restorations in China, it's truly remarkable. Look it up. They're all on YouTube. It's an amazing project that the Chinese government launched in the late 90s, in which there was an area that's been used by civilization for thousands of years, was deeply degraded. The whole area, both biological and human, had degraded dramatically. And that over the course of about 25 years, through concerted action, they restored an area larger than Delaware that is now a vibrant ecological, social, and economic system. And you might say, well, okay, that's China. We can't do that here. We did it here. In the 1930s, we were facing an ecological catastrophe of absolutely epic proportions. In fact, if we had fully lost control of the Great Plains ecosystems, we probably would have kicked climate change in even faster. But instead, recognizing that crisis, we mobilized millions of people to plant billions of trees, build hundreds of thousands of check dams, implement all kinds of soil conservation and land. We created thousands of little nurseries to grow out native plants, and we restored an entire continental ecosystem. We can do this, and we must do this, which means that it's not simply about investing in a bunch of new energy technologies, which we need to do, but we need to invest in communities, especially place-based, indigenous, and other communities that are going to steward these lands back into the health that will actually temper and stabilize these systems for us now and into the future. Okay, so I'll end by just saying, well, what can we do about it? Well, I'll just describe some of the work that we're launching here in Boulder. The first is a program that we're calling Cool Boulder. It has three broad natural area actions that we've launched. A connected canopies effort, which is building out our urban canopies of both forest and shrubs and others to start creating the shade that we're going to need in these hotter times. Absorbent landscapes, in which we're working with landscapes both within the city and around us to be able to absorb not only carbon, but water. By the way, water is truly the leading indicator of health, not carbon, water, and energy and carbon. And also pollinator pathways. We need to be building these rich, diverse conduits of biological activity that keeps all of this system alive. So we have literally dozens of organizations and hundreds of our community members already stepping up in activities going on all over the place, which is super exciting. So coolboulder.org, go there. State level, regional level, we're working with the county. If our county colleagues are here, I just want to call them out. Fantastic teams, amazing work that they're doing. We have teams that are working on the natural climate solution sides, the energy side, but we're starting to work on a variety of these larger efforts, looking at how we can move regional systems like Excel and others to make these kinds of changes, not just within our boundaries, but within all those areas. We're also working on a regional urban forestry expansion effort that has dozens of jurisdictions to go after the $1.5 billion that we got secured into the federal budget this year for expansion of urban forestry. On a national level, we were actually integral to organizing around those billions of dollars for urban forestry, and now we're supporting communities around the country to move in a similar direction. On an international level, we're working through the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. We did a project just recently with Helsinki, Stockholm, and Minneapolis to connect biochar applications to urban forestry. And I also just want to call out that we're now starting to try to engage in the international policy realm. We're sending one of our colleagues, Rella Abernathy, to the Convention on Biodiversity in Montreal in a couple of weeks so that we can start to say that local jurisdictions have a vested interest in that set of work, and we're starting to look at the same thing in the combating desertification area. So this is to say we can do this, we are doing this, we invite you to join us in doing this, and we must do this. So I hope that I've just been able to give you that sense that the living systems, the natural climate solutions, are an integral part of the work that we've got to do.
Some people accuse Brett of being overly passionate. I just don't see it. Just don't see it. Honestly, if anybody can follow that, it would be Heidi Van Genderen. But let me just make a couple of remarks here. Brett, thank you. And you all can see how amazing our office discussions probably are in terms of where we're headed and the work that we're doing. A couple of connectors here, and I think that this is just so exciting because what we have been doing for many years now is learning and taking those insights from the work that we do as the city, understanding what we can control, where we can be most effective as local government, and then how do we partner more effectively. And this is just coming back to the importance of our work with the county, our work with the private sector, our work with the university, because it is going to take all of us, all of our entities working in the same direction. And that's why this is so exciting. There are so many dimensions in terms of the research and the application, and then connecting it to the people and our ecosystems. And that's why I think this has been a really great conversation so far. So talking about collaboration, this is where I'm not trying to cause any whiplash here with you, Heidi. So I think it's just been so fantastic to be able to explore and really start to nurture this relationship that we have with the university in so many different ways, in terms of research and application, but also thinking about how we are big entities moving together. And so there was so much I could gush about my friend Heidi Van Genderen down here at the end. I'm not going to read a bio. Let me just say that her credentials are an absolute mile long, and we are so fortunate to have her working here at the university in our community doing what she does. It really is extraordinary. So Heidi, I'm gonna throw you a softball because you're pinch hitting right now. Sorry, that was a sports analogy anyway.
Okay.
One of the things that I think you and I have talked a lot about is how do we strengthen that collaboration between the university and the city? And so part of what has been really interesting to explore with you is how does the university, a big entity just like the city and other big entities within a community, how does the university think about these big broad issues like climate, like human rights issues, and how do we connect in terms of those big entities to make sure that we're all going in the same direction? Maybe that wasn't an easy question. But.
Thank you, Jonathan. I am here to wing it. I just want to reiterate that I was recruited for the panel in the absence of the two colleagues about 5 minutes before it started. So thank you, Lori, for all your good work on the local track. And a true honor to join this panel. And I'm going to say that had I been assessing this, you didn't need me, given the three predecessors we've had here. But I appreciate it. I would point first of all, to the Right Here, Right Now Global Climate Summit as one thing that has, been a key indicator of what a university can do. It's been my great honor also to serve as a co-chair for that summit that has taken the last 13 months for us to put together. And I hope that you all are here, that you've had a chance to go to a little bit of the summit, and you will continue to attend more because it is straight to the heart of what you all have been talking about. And that is the need for nature-based solutions, recognition of the importance of indigenous communities, and the fact that 90% of the undisturbed ecosystems on the planet are those that are governed by indigenous communities that have not been affected nearly as much by human development. As I listen to each of you, there are 8 billion people on the planet now. I'm a grandmother myself, but when my grandfathers were both born, and I knew them both, there were only 1.5 billion people on the planet. So when you look at the importance and consideration of land use and the opportunity that we have and the responsibility that we have to consider that within the broader context. And by the way, you're going to be recruited to become faculty at the university so that we can just, acquire that asset so that the education and learning that we all have on a daily basis can continue at pace. Robin Wall Kimmerer was in town yesterday, and I just want to commend to all of you, if you have not yet read her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, please do, because it is a remarkable work filled with the wisdom of what it is we're trying to do in learning from the nature-based solutions which we need to deploy going forward. The town-gown relationship, as the mayor has pointed out, has only gotten better, certainly, since I was fortunate enough to return to Boulder. And there's endless opportunity. Paul, I'm interested when I listen to you to think about really also the systemic level in the provision of what we need, the good work that Crystal's doing. So yes, reaching out to the individuals, very important, because we each need to be empowered with what it is we can do. But truthfully, for many, many people, it will be a provision of a sustainable systemic solution that we seek in order to perpetuate a planetary population of 8 billion people, which regardless of where we are on that planet. Another remarkable thing about this summit is, in fact, the fact that 55 countries are represented in the participants, and that we have tremendous learning. You talked about your work through CNCA globally. It is a global challenge. It is a global opportunity with absolute local solutions being implemented community by community. The University of Colorado has 30% of its student population that is food insecure. It's a fairly shocking statistic, really. And when I listen to my colleagues and think about, again, the nature-based solutions, reliance and learning from traditional communities and their cultures, the whole of food is a key, along with water, such a key area and opportunity for us. We live in a particularly challenging climate, a semi-arid montane climate, where the first thing you don't think, in fact, when we lived here early on, when our kids were little, we had a stint and then left and came back. I remember a neighbor of mine who was out working in what became community gardens up behind Everett Long's Iris Garden, and she's out there and she's like, "You have to be a warrior against the soil." And I was like, "How's that gonna work for your garden?" Bring it along. Anyway, how much we can, we need to, again, think about maximum production of sustainable, locally grown food to the greatest degree possible. We've got some regenerative ag champions. Robin Luff's in the second row. Thank you again for all that you do, all of you as well. We just need to convene, and one of the great opportunities that Jonathan and I have worked on through the years, use this university as a convening forum to bring together all the good people in this community who are ready to march forward, learn what we need to do, manifest that change, measure our progress, come back for the next Right Here, Right Now Global Climate Summit, so the reporting out of that has great progress in a year or two.
We could end right there and call this a success. We have a couple minutes, though. Heidi, thank you. Those were fantastic remarks. You can pinch at any time, I tell you. I want to use the time that we have remaining and just maybe do some rapid fire questions, kind of coming back to some of the points. So Paul, I want to give you an opportunity to speak again, if you don't mind. One of the things that I wanted to raise that I don't think we talk enough about, you had done some work for the city and the county as part of our lawsuit against ExxonMobil and Suncor. And one of the things that was really striking to me is the cost associated with the adaptation that needs to occur. So as primary providers of local public services, local governments aren't necessarily thinking about the cost of how we adapt to the changes that are anticipated. So my question to you, this is something that you did, you actually put a dollar figure to say, here's what it looks like in terms of temperature increase, correlate that to impact to our roads and our trails and our infrastructure. And I think it made some heads explode, quite honestly, mine included. My question to you is this: are cities, our communities, our local governments thinking about those costs, those anticipated costs to adapt? And who's going to pay for that? That's a totally unfair question.
That is an unfair. The reality is no local government can afford to pay for the costs of climate change. The costs are so large that there's one example I'll give really quick, coastal example. There's a little island, Pawleys Island, South Carolina. It's one of my favorite examples. And sea level rise is affecting it. And we figured out it would cost each resident on that island $2.5 million over the next year to protect that island's infrastructure. Now, how would you like to get the tax bill for that one, in the mail, right? The fact is, this is a problem that cannot be put on the shoulders of local government. And it is unconscionable to me, looking around the world, that there are corporations, there are people making billions of dollars of profit while we're trying to figure out how to have food supply, how to prevent desertification, how to protect our roads, because we can't afford it. The people who are responsible for climate change must step up to the plate. This is not just a local government problem. It can't be solved that way. It's not right, it's not ethical, and it's not moral. And that's something that the entire world needs to get behind, because this just isn't right.
I'm patting myself on the back for asking that question. We have about 4 minutes. Crystal, something you said earlier I just want to come back to, because you live and work squarely in this space of collective action at the neighborhood level. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is, what advice, what could you share in terms of how we really strengthen the role of neighborhoods in this collective action space to both advance adaptive behaviors, to think about resilience, to think about climate action? What role do neighborhoods play, and what advice would you give us?
So I think the way that it all started from us, so that's all I can speak from is my experience, is it was really, there was a burning need that we answered. And so I think one of the risks that we have, and the burning need at the time was, there were a lot of, well, in Ponderosa, there was the issue around failing infrastructure, but then in manufactured home communities everywhere, there was some kind of like challenges around like rents rising, predatory behavior, changing markets where there are, multinational corporations investing in these one-time mom and pops, right? So there's a lot of pressure on these communities. And so a lot of how we responded was, to get actively involved in supporting legislative change that has more enforcement. And by the way, the university was involved in that as well. But I think it's really you meet people's needs, right? You don't show up with your solution. You build a relationship and you stay involved. I think it's a long path, and that creates that resilience when you kind of address those most burning challenges. Then there is that additional capacity to deal with other issues.
We have 2 minutes, and I want to give Lori an opportunity to kind of wrap. I'm going to abuse my moderator role for 60 seconds, and I'll turn it over to Lori. And I hope you all heard a little bit of a theme here today, and I hope we got a bit of a collective message across that we can't continue to think that we can solve this crisis in the same way that's got us into this mess in the first place. So I'm really proud of the work that this community does to really learn from our experience, to develop those insights, and to really chart a path that really benefits everybody. So let's let our creative juices flow. Let's redesign the system of ours. We made it, we can change it, we can fix it one step at a time, one idea at a time. So if you would join me in thanking these amazing panelists, and then we'll turn it over to Lori.
Thank you, Jonathan. And please join me in thanking Jonathan for his awesome moderating. Yes.